This video is sponsored by Novium, creators of the Hover Pen. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Viewers are often asking me for book recommendations in the comments section, and I just read The Trolls of Wall Street by Nathaniel Popper, which is a really fascinating look at meme stock mania that we've seen in recent years, and I had to tell you guys about it. Describing the book as just a book about meme stocks would be selling it short, and I never recommend selling anything short on this channel. In fact, that's one of the lessons of this book. The book's more interesting than just a book about meme stocks because it examines how online discourse and society as a whole have changed over the last few years. We've lived through a fairly strange time of lockdowns, mass protests over a variety of hot button topics, arguments about free speech, and through what the press has described as an epidemic of loneliness. And this book manages to pull all of these topics together while being mostly about meme stocks and the WallStreetBets subreddit. I'm lucky to have the author Nathaniel Popper on the channel today, and I think you'll find this topic as interesting as I do. I just finished reading the book yesterday, and to be honest, I really enjoyed it.
That is so great.
The reason I enjoyed it actually is, the kind of GameStop and meme stock story is a good story, but I felt this was much broader than that. It was kind of a story of sort of what markets were like over the last year, kind of the strangeness of COVID and people, at home joining online communities. And even I think there were things like, big topics like social media moderation that everyone has been talking about, with regard to all sorts of things like, Hunter Biden's laptop and presidential elections and, Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter.
Yeah,
And, the way Reddit is moderated was kind of fascinating in this story too.
that is so nice to hear. That's so nice to hear. I mean, it's amazing because when I started this, I was actually digging into your podcast to understand some of the dynamics around GameStop. So this is a great moment, sort of full circle moment to come around and talk with you about all this because I do feel like I learned so much in the course of writing this, and it took me in so many unexpected directions.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the things I enjoyed, when you get to the end of the book, you see, the little section on the research process, and it's such an interesting thing that, maybe at many times in the past you'd research things like this, and there'd be sort of a he said, she said kind of situation, while all of this stuff is on forums. Like this was,
Yes.
text based, so you can you really find the data. It's not
Yeah.
ambiguous.
Yeah, social media, I think it sort of makes a new kind of history, a new kind of real-time history telling possible.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
did,
And so,
you
so tell
didn't
me,
have,
tell me what drew you to the story originally. Was it just that there was, because there's sort of the kind of thing that would maybe drive you to write an article and a different thing that would drive you to write a book.
yeah, I was covering GameStop as it was happening. I was at the New York Times and we were chasing down Roaring Kitty and trying to understand how this had happened. It was such a bizarre moment in which all of the world's attention got trained on this bizarre stock that nobody had heard of except a bunch of gamers, of course. And as I began to talk to the people around this, I realized, people were thinking about this as a sort of flash in the pan. There was this thing that had suddenly flared up overnight and was going to disappear. And what I saw was that there was something much deeper going on here. There was something with much deeper roots that went back much further than I had understood as I was reporting the story out. And so there's sort of a simple story of GameStop. And then there's this bigger story that I discovered, which is really sort of the rise of a new generation of young, particularly young men, young people who are fascinated by the markets and who have turned this into a sort of centerpiece in their life in the way that maybe sports was for a previous generation.
Yeah, and I guess also driven by the COVID lockdown when things like sports weren't available, right?
Exactly. You had this moment where uh, the forms of entertainment that were available to people changed overnight, and you know this idea of trading and markets as entertainment was something that had sort of been bubbling up since the last financial crisis. And it was not, it didn't happen overnight. Coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, Americans and were alienated from the markets. Young people had gotten out of the markets, were in there at record low rates. And this slow growth that happened in this new kind of relationship to the markets, in which it became a sort of form of community and a form of entertainment. And it sort of spoke to all these different weird urges in people.
Before we go any further, let me tell you about this week's video sponsor, Novium, who create innovative high-end products that aim to inspire curiosity and develop creativity. I really like having a nice pen at my desk, and I don't want to have to search around in a drawer for one. The Novium Hover Pen, inspired by space, is an original and timeless gift idea, well suited to a holiday like Father's Day or any other occasion. The Hover Pen won a design award from Time magazine as one of the best inventions of 2022. I've been using two different versions. The Hover Pen Interstellar Edition, a refillable ballpoint pen that hovers at a 23.5-degree angle on its base, a nod to the Earth's axial tilt. It does this using magnets. It's light and well balanced, and it feels great in the hand. It's available in a range of colors. There's even a meteorite edition where a shard of a real meteorite has been added to the tip. Then there's the HoverPen Future Edition, which is my favorite of the two, as it has exchangeable tips, so you can set it up as either a rollerball pen or as a fountain pen, which I prefer. It's available in deep black frost silver or mist blue, and you can even get one with a solid gold nib. Because the pens magnetically hover, you can spin them while they're floating on their base. Whether this is something for your desk or a gift for someone special, use the code PATRICK to get 10% off plus free shipping for all hover pens. Novium ship worldwide, so be sure to order yours today. The world, but including me, kind of got WallStreetBets quite wrong because I probably originally heard of it. There was all this talk of the kind of lost porn trades, of someone, putting every penny into some trade that's heavily, heavily levered, and they either make or lose a fortune in a few minutes and sort of videotape their response to it and post it on Wall Street Bets.
And there was plenty of
And
that. There was plenty of that.
there was that, but it's so interesting in many ways how the forum changed, which related to changing people using it, but also even I had felt that the groundswell actually occurred initially on Wall Street Bets, but that's not really what happened. It was more stock twits, right?
Right. When it comes to GameStop, this little core community had developed on StockTwits, as you mentioned, and it had grown up over really a year before anybody in the public heard about it. And you got this community, it was at the core maybe a dozen people who just got really into this stock and thinking about the potential that GameStop had that all of these short sellers were missing. And at the center of that community was Roaring Kitty, who had this YouTube channel where twice a week this community would come together and they would review every single fact and filing and news item that they could find that would tell them anything about this stock. But it was this really fascinating sort of crowdsourced research effort. It was not just, oh, GameStop is a funny stock, let's put everything on it. there was a lot of work that went into this. And the fact that GameStop went up, the fact that it went up to $400, $500 when it went totally crazy, that was totally irrational. But the initial sort of surge that brought GameStop into the public eye, the fact that the stock went up, I mean, this little group really had realized something in their research that people were missing. And, that is part of the story that interests me. It's the way in which we so often see this as, the dumb money. But
Mm.
swirling beneath this is people really learning about the markets and how the economy work and how companies work. And yeah, that happened initially on StockTwits during COVID. And at some point they realized, Wall Street Bets is where the action is there. We got to take our story, we got to take this narrative there. And that's where it really sort of exploded.
Well, even that idea, and this is an idea I would have had as well, of Wall Street Bets as sort of an unruly corner of the internet. But interestingly, the lead people within Wall Street Bets initially wanted to ban discussions of things like Bitcoin. They didn't allow sort of pump and dump type activity, and they specifically were trying to stop people talking about GameStop rather than the other idea that there was this unruly, unmoderated crew who just were pumping and dumping whatever they wanted. It's quite a different. The truth is quite stranger than the idea many people would have had.
Yeah, I mean, Wall Street Bets is this incredibly complicated place. And I think it's really interesting to look at, not just in itself and because, I mean, now it has 15 million members, not just because it has the ability to move markets, but because it's representative of a new kind of online community that, there are a lot of now and that
Mm.
govern the lives and the way people think, far beyond Reddit, far beyond Wall Street Bets. And as you're pointing out, these online communities are often seen as these unruly sort of, anything goes atmospheres. But when they work, it's because there is a sort of code of conduct. There's a weird set of rules. I mean, maybe a little bit like, the movie Fight Club, where, it's people getting out these aggressive instincts, and it can be violent, it can be ugly, but there's also sort of a set of rules that draws people in and makes people feel a part of it. And that's what made it work. I mean, if it had just been anything goes and anybody could post anything, that would not have happened. GameStop would have not gone to the moon, and this community wouldn't have come together in the way that it did.
Now, tell me what your thoughts are, because it's sort of fascinating. Obviously, a lot of people in the press have been saying that this resurgence in GameStop and AMC is down to the reappearance
Roaring
I
Kitty.
keep wanting to call him Hello Kitty, which is not the correct cat,
Different cat.
on Twitter. But obviously, I feel that around the same time I tweeted that you had written this book. And I feel that that's likely what caused this resurgence in interest.
It was obviously the two of us. Yes, the fact that the
Yeah.
book was coming, I think, is why that stock suddenly gained $5 billion overnight market cap. Yeah, no, I mean, I think this latest resurgence of Roaring Kitty is really interesting, and I'm still sort of trying to make sense of it. It's a little bizarre, and I tell the story of Roaring Kitty, or Keith Gill, who developed this very interesting online persona in the course of 2020 and 2021, and then suddenly disappeared. And now, 3 years later, he pops up with these bizarre, very meme-friendly posts that suggest he's coming back, suggest there's going to be a revival. It's frankly very out of character with the Roaring Kitty and Keith Gill of 2020 and 2021. I mean, it's interesting when you look back that Roaring Kitty was one of these characters who was really calling for restraint throughout the whole GameStop thing. I mean, he had a real financial thesis about GameStop.
Mm.
And it was this idea that there was this console reset, that all the video game companies released their new consoles, and I mean it was this very elaborate financial thesis that was borne out in large part. And
Yeah.
as he led that community back then, he was a somebody who was always about going back to the facts and making sure that we're talking about financial reality and not just sort of getting caught in our own narrative. He was always looking to question his story. And this new resurgence of Roaring Kitty is something very different. It is not a sort of responsible, measured character who's saying, let's look at this stock and understand the free cash flow. It's
Mm.
somebody who's just trying to get the crowd worked up. And I've actually had questions during this about whether this is the same Roaring Kitty. Roaring and Keith Gill, I mean, this is somebody who really has taken himself out of the story. Has not. I called his lawyer during this and said, "Is this the same guy?" His lawyer, all his lawyer would say to me, "We're not saying anything about this." But it's a very strange incident, and I think in some ways it actually distracts from the real story of what's going on with retail trading and this ongoing interest in the markets that you know popped up during COVID and is still with us today. It has not
Yeah,
gone
yeah, very much
away
so. Yeah.
as people had thought it would.
Well, the other thing that really interested me is, in a way, like Roaring Kitty came to this with this understanding of the fundamentals, but then he seemed to stick with it with an understanding of a short squeeze and how it could work. And you explain in the book that there were meme stocks before the ones we've all heard of. One that surprised me were things like lumber liquidators and what was the other one? Michael's, the sort of craft store. But that the people in this community, there's sort of this mix, I guess, of the GME owls who were talking about the fundamentals, and then maybe more the Wall Street Bets guys who kind of got that when a squeeze happens, it can go. Because to me, the closest thing to it at the time was the Volkswagen squeeze from 2008.
Yeah,
And I really expected it to work out just like that because, there's not really any other. This was a new
there isn't
thing.
much of a precedent for this.
But talk to me a bit about the early squeezes and the how the moderators dealt with them within Wall Street Bets.
Yeah. I mean, for the first several years that Wall Street Bets existed, they sort of joked about influencing the markets. They joked about how they were too small and puny, and the markets were you know, these sort of alienating networks that were governed by professional traders. And there was, part of the culture of Wall Street Bets was it grew out of this feeling of powerlessness. And in some ways, they exercise that powerlessness by making crazy trades. But through experimentation, essentially, they became entertaining and drew in a broader audience, but also sort of realized how the markets worked. And that's this ongoing theme in this book is this idea that it was both sort of stupid and brilliant at the same time. They were both being idiots, and they also understood something. They also came to understand something that even most financial experts didn't understand. And that
Yeah.
became clear. I mean, the first real uh, sort of squeeze that was set off by Wall Street Bets was Tesla. I mean, Tesla was the first real test case where a bunch of people came together online and started seeing each other's weird options trades on Tesla, where they were betting on Tesla going up. And because there's social media, they could all see the trades that they're making, and without necessarily explicit coordination, they all start placing very similar looking trades, and they realize that the way the options market works is that the market makers on the other side of these trades at some point have to start buying the shares, which sends the stock up, and it becomes this sort of self-perpetuating cycle. And I mean, this is confusing stuff. I mean, gamma squeezes, short squeezes are confusing, gamma squeezes are another level of confusing. And yet this community sort of realized like, oh my God, we are pushing this stock up. Hedge funds are shorting Tesla. They all think Tesla's going to lose money, but we're pushing this stock up and they're losing money and they're getting scared. And there was this great reporter at Bloomberg named Luke Kawa who started to document this. And the guys on Wall Street Bets were following every article that Luke Kawa was writing on Bloomberg as he explained, this is how a gamma squeeze works. And, there was this crazy sort of uncoordinated coordination that went on where suddenly Tesla was going to the moon. And everybody thought, okay, this is going to end. This is going to end. This has to end. Tesla's not making any money. This is never going to work. And yet, basically, for the next 3 years, Tesla just kept on going up, and hedge funders lost, really tens of billions of dollars on their short bets, thinking that these retail guys would have to give up at some point.
Mm.
And, that was this first discovery, but it soon led to this, these strange campaigns where they were looking at, Virgin Galactic and Plug Power. And that eventually, of course, led to GameStop. But this combination that I talk about in this book between this highbrow and lowbrow, this fine-tuned understanding of how the options markets works and what market makers do, combined with these memes. I mean, it's really this world we live in, this world that I talk about as this world of trolling. Trolling has become this part of our culture. It's Donald Trump. It's this idea that it's a joke, but there's also something serious about it. Everybody when Donald Trump.
Yeah, there's sort of plausible deniability in there.
Yeah, and it's this bizarre sort of cultural vector that has come to exercise an enormous influence. And we see it in politics, and this is what I'm tracing is how we see this in the financial markets.
Well, actually, one of the things that was really interesting was, as you pointed out in the book, that GameStop wasn't, they kind of like these spacey technology type companies initially. And then we had GameStop, and the sort of spark that lit GameStop was this video on the internet of someone getting robbed for their PlayStation outside a GameStop on, I think, Black Friday, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was right after Thanksgiving in 2020 that GameStop really started to go into a sort of vertical ascent. And that was a month before, before it went viral in a whole different kind of way. You had these sort of different paths as it went up. But yeah, that was this moment where some guy is getting robbed of his PlayStation, which is this tawdry, dark thing that's captured on the internet, and yet the guys on Wall Street Bet realize there's this line outside of GameStop where people are waiting to buy PlayStations. All of the companies have just released their new consoles. This is big business. This is and that moment actually represented a real sort of financial understanding of how the GameStop business worked, how the video game industry worked, and that sort of weird combination of high and low.
Well, even you pointed out one of the guys on the board had worked out that that he could essentially work out what the sales were at GameStop by collecting receipt numbers, and so within this forum just sort of crowdsourced that kind of information where a Wall Street analyst wouldn't know what, because a Wall Street analyst just has to kind of call up and
Yeah.
do more standard analysis. You don't have 10,000 gamers in a forum who'll tell you I bought a PlayStation and this is the receipt number.
Yeah, I mean, the hedge funds are relying on things like satellite pictures of parking lots outside the mall. I mean, they do that kind of analysis, but it is this inherently secretive industry where you don't talk on social media about what your bet is for the most part. And here you have this totally different approach where like let's let's bring the crowd, let's bring the hive mind to this and figure out what we can discover. And that democratization of information, had not been brought to the markets before.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. It's also so interesting how, all of these things sort of came together to make it happen. And one of the things I was fascinated in the book is just this idea of the ownership of social media or the ownership of a platform, because obviously there were people who came and went, and the crowds grew and they waxed and waned, and you end up with this situation where there are many people who sort of felt that they owned or controlled, or and in many ways you look at it and you think it's kind of quite reasonable, like in that if you run a YouTube channel, you get paid to run a YouTube channel, while if you run this what did you say, like 18 million readers of Wall Street Bets, and no one makes a penny out of it, right? Like it's kind of fascinating.
I mean, Reddit makes a pretty penny out of this. Obviously, Reddit just had its IPO. Reddit's own stock, unsurprisingly, became a sort of meme stock in this confusing way. But Reddit's own success has been closely tied, obviously, to the growth of these communities. I mean, these communities are where that company gets its value, but the people building those communities are the moderators and the people who are going on every day and writing the content. I mean, that's obviously the stuff that Reddit is now monetizing by, striking deals with AI companies. So Reddit is making money, but you have these sort of like serfs of the internet who are making it all happen, and generally earning nothing from it, other than, I would say, they are getting a sense of community. That so
Yeah.
much of this is about people who are lonely, people who are looking for community, people who are looking for a place to meet people like them. And Reddit has offered that, and that's there is some real value there, and that's why people keep coming back.
Yeah, well, it was so interesting. Like, even well, one of the things was, I guess, there was sort of a feeling that everyone in Wall Street Bets, or at least the early people, had made a ton of money out of the short squeeze. While if you look at most of the big names, at least the moderators and the people who'd been there a long time, were largely uninvested in this squeeze and were maybe nervous about what was going on and trying to dampen things down. And then, towards the end, many of them like seeked out press and that sort of thing and said, I am the spokesman of these people. But they weren't really spokespeople of the forum. The forum, was its own animal, right?
Yeah, I mean, the crowd became its own sort of living organism, and the moderators played this interesting role in sort of guiding and directing the conversation. I mean, my book, I talk about these two main guys who were at the center of the story and who were sort of representative in different ways of this crowd. I mean, these guys who were struggling in life and looking for a sense of meaning and a sense of community, and they took this real sense of pride in this community that existed. They felt like it was something new, and they couldn't always put their finger on it, but it meant a lot to them, and they were guiding it. But they weren't the ones who were coming up with these crazy bets and realizing these little loopholes in the markets that they could slip through and start to influence things on a much broader level. And it was the crowd that did that, and then some of these moderators then began fighting for the sort of attention and limelight that came afterwards. And there have been so many stories told about this, but those stories so often don't really capture the weird complexity of this whole thing.
Well, even there was a rather sad moment in the book where Jordan, I'd call him the main character in the book,
Yeah.
all of this is going on, and he's got this big computer setup where he's monitoring everything and he's got everything working. And whenever he steps away, it all falls into chaos. But there's all of this wealth being generated, and Jordan can't pay the property tax on his home. He's sort of
Yeah.
working. It sounds like almost through the night on this project, on this forum. Where people love him and he loves the other members, but
Right. Boiler's
it's
broken.
distasteful to monetize it, I guess. But equally, the guy can't pay his bills.
I know this funny contradiction where people had faith in Wall Street Bets because they felt that the moderators were not trying to take advantage of them. They felt like the
Hmm.
moderators were there sort of hosting this weird playground for them. And they trusted the moderators because they weren't trying to make money off of it. And yet this is a community that's about money and trying to make money. And that another one of these strange paradoxes in the middle of this, and really in the middle of a lot of modern creator culture, our online culture. I think we haven't really fully wrapped our heads around it, around all the strange dynamics. And Jordan, who is my main character, just represented so much of this. Like this guy who was in the middle of a community of 15 million people, who so often felt lonely and got nothing out of it, and yet derived an incredible sense of purpose from it.
Yeah, yeah. Another, I guess, big part of the story. Actually, one of the things I was fascinated as well by was, obviously, one of our villains in the story is Robin Hood, right? But interestingly enough, early on, the Wall Street Bets guys knew that Robin Hood was a terrible broker. I mean, it was kind of an ongoing joke about how awful Robin Hood was. But equally, the growth of Robin Hood related to the growth of Wall Street Bets. And then when everything went wrong, well, it's so fascinating, that interaction, right?
It was a sort of like parasitic relationship in which they fed off of each other, but were also weakening each other. And I mean, there were all of these moments where Robin Hood screwing up became the story on Wall Street Bets. Wall Street Bets would realize there was some glitch in the way that Robin Hood worked, and they would take advantage of it, and express great glee in figuring out ways to make Robin Hood lose money. And this happened
Hmm.
over and over again. And it was this classic tech company that was all about growth and not about building a product that worked. And the Robinhood product just broke over and over again when the customers needed it the most. It was Robinhood had this message that they were democratizing trading and making trading available and allowing you to trade anytime. And then it would just go down when you needed it most. And so you got this relationship in which the Wall Street guys both relied on Robinhood and hated it, and it just sort of fed on itself, and it reached a culmination, of course, in the GameStop moment when Robinhood really shut the whole thing down by stopping trading when
Hmm.
just as the stock was hitting a peak.
And that's sort of an interesting point in the story because, in a funny way, I feel I've seen someone else describe it as a short squeeze that turned into a conspiracy theory, and that was really where that was the moment. And it almost seems that things like Wall Street Bets fell apart at that point as well. Like there were spin-off forums that were either more focused on the meme stocks, or that were angrier, or that were, you related even the ideas of sort of QAnon type conspiracy stuff sort of fed many members of the community too.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this whole movement is about a sort of distrust of traditional culture, traditional finance. So much of this is about saying, smart people buy index funds, smart people just, buy and hold. We don't, we've lost confidence in that. And, there are real parallels between that and the rise of Trump, who's this person who's saying, you can't trust the government, you can't trust, and people trusted, the only thing people trusted was that distrust, and that fueled this movement from the beginning. This was all about doubting Wall Street, being skeptical of the things that Wall Street was thinking, seeing this power in the common man, and at times it could lead to a new understanding of how finance worked, and that happened in GameStop. But it could tip over into this sort of conspiracy theory kind of mindset, and that's what happened after Robinhood shut down trading in GameStop. It just turned into a sort of movement of conspiracy theorists. And that's not the only thing that happened. I mean, there was a lot of other trading that was opened up by this. So I don't want to, that wasn't the end of the story, but it seems to be the way that so many stories in online culture go, where, it starts with sort of a reasonable distrust. I mean, Donald Trump was a character who people imagine voting for, but it so easily tips over into Pizzagate and QAnon, and the line between this is, I think, part of the issue with trolling, where it's hard to tell when somebody's being serious and when they're when it's meant to be a joke and when it's meant to be serious, and that interplay was really there with GameStop, where it turned from this sort of you know popular excitement about this stock and tipped over into this strange online world of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, one of the things that I found particularly unpleasant at the time was you described the sort of influencers, the David Portnoy, is that his name? And there was sort of Elon and Chamath, and there were a bunch of other
Yeah.
very wealthy people who kind of turned up, I would sort of say, late to the party and kind of cheered it on. And I remember at the time feeling it was wrong of sort of a billionaire to go on Twitter and tell people, yeah, pile into this thing and haha, it's hilarious if you lose all of your money. I'm still rich. And I
Yeah.
felt that there was, it's even interesting, like a community of, probably self described underdogs who then look up to like a certain group of billionaires as kind of being like them, even though
Yeah.
there's no reason to believe that these, people, many of them have sort of disgraced themselves since then, but, people who really, these people felt possibly had their interests at heart.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good online essay called "The Culture of Grift," and the way in which grifting became a sort of central part of the online world. And I think there's a way in which Donald Trump is a part of that story. This person who plays on the distrust of his audience to make them trust him, but then sort of turns on their interests. And I think you saw that in the financial world with Elon Musk and Chamath. I mean, Chamath was selling SPACs to this crowd and pulling fees out as the money came in. Not worrying about what was going to happen to those stocks. As they
Yeah,
eventually.
with no thought for the people who might struggle to put food on the table because while he's in his private jet kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, I think there's an element of this that is, you know, inherent to the internet in this world in which you're an online avatar and you just see these crowds of people who are just sort of weird screen names, and it's so easy to sort of depersonalize the whole thing. You go viral and you have 80,000 followers, and yet they're not real humans. And I think that has happened, and I think you've seen that with Elon Musk and his willingness to pump, Dogecoin. I mean, these things that, again, it was always the
Yeah, it can be a joke to him, but it's someone else's savings.
yeah,
It's
and I think we haven't had the full reckoning of what that cost people. Elon Musk was always pumping it as it was near the peak, and then he would just, as it crashed, he would just sort of laugh it off. I mean, it obviously didn't matter to him, but it did matter to the people who had followed him.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised years ago when I read the SEC report that the average account size on Robinhood was a couple of $100, which, of course, you go back 10 years earlier, if you couldn't have opened a brokerage account with that much money. But, equally, these are, there are many people who are not in a secure financial situation. And it's easy to say, "Oh, big deal, they lost $100," but when all you have is $100, that's a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, Wall Street Bets, one of the things that it turned into over time was this place where you could sort of seek emotional consolation and when you had just lost all your savings. I mean, you have some of these really sad stories, sad moments in the book where people talk about how they had, come to the markets in a sort of state of desperation, thinking that this might be something that could bail them out. Their lives, they didn't see where they were going. They couldn't imagine owning a house. They had student debt. And, they made these big bets and they, more than a few of them lost it all. I mean, there's, this story of a suicide in my book that I talk about. And, Wall Street Bets, I think part of the idea of the community and part of the idea of the moderators was often to try to get people. I mean, it was a place where you could find company in your loneliness and in your sadness, but it was also a place where you could learn and realize what not to do. And, the moderators,
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting elements of the moderators is they often saw this sort of, the loss porn as they wanted to talk people out of it. They wanted to help make people better at this and realize that there was a different way to do it. And I mean, I'm not sure how well the Wall Street Bets itself succeeded in that, but you did see over time that people learn from their mistakes, and they you'd have these moments of sort of group hysteria, but people would realize afterwards, like, that's not how you do it. We have to, there's a different way to do, to play the markets. And, with my book, I think I try to bring it around to this story where, meme stocks have faded in importance over time. And yet, this new generation of retail traders is still very much in the markets, and they seem to be doing relatively well as a group. I mean, there are these
Yeah.
sad stories of loss that are, throughout this whole thing. And then there's this other thing that's happened, which is that, like, young people now think markets are interesting.
Towards the end of the book, you pointed out that early on, young people didn't own stocks and they didn't trust anything. And today, 57% of Americans own stocks, and young people are almost, did you say more likely than
Yeah, I
older
mean,
people to
the
own
rate
stocks?
of growth of ownership among young Americans is much faster than among older Americans. I mean, it's become this sort of popular preoccupation for youth and in youth culture.
Now, tell me that there was one bit where you talked about sort of this idea that it was this great David and Goliath moment, but then you question whether David or Goliath actually won, and if everything is counted up. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, the David and Goliath story is one of the most complicated pieces of the Wall Street Bet story because, the Wall Street Bet certainly saw itself as a David up against these hedge fund Goliaths. And I think the popular narrative, I mean, the sort of mainstream understanding is that Goliath always wins. Goliath always slaps down the little guy, and the little guy always ends up losing. And I think it is a more complicated story than that. I mean, I think if you just look at GameStop, I mean, that this was a real moment of reckoning for the hedge fund industry. I mean, the hedge fund industry in the months after GameStop and still today has realized that this crowd, there's a power there. And there are certainly firms, the market making firms are making money from the retail traders, whether they make money or lose money. And so there's a degree to which this has been good for Wall Street, but it has really changed the markets. I mean, there's a sense in which hedge funds are now afraid to short stocks. I mean, the and overall short levels have gone down over time. And I think to some degree this crowd has the Davids have bought into the idea that the Goliaths will always win, but I think actually the Davids haven't realized their their power. I mean, I think
Mm.
part of what is in this story is that this crowd, when it's mobilized, has a lot more power than even the people in the crowd think it does. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's true today. I think that this retail crowd is still playing a very important role in markets that was not true, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's the case. One of the things we saw, like there's some sort of what can we call like screenshots of P&L, and you see, I think Roaring Kitty started out with maybe like around a $50,000
Yeah.
account. He spun it up to, I feel, maybe close. Was it like 47 million, and
Yeah,
then
right around 50 million.
yeah, and then it declined maybe to around 17. And there was all the sort of lure of diamond hands and everything else. And there were other characters in the book that I feel there was a guy who maybe made 200 million in the squeeze. Like there was big money, but did many of them walk away, or are they sort of, are the diamond hands still in place?
Well, I don't think the diamond hands are generally in place with GameStop among those people who made the tens of millions of dollars. I mean, Roaring Kitty himself, wisely, it wasn't much notice at the time, but wisely cashed out as it went out. He got out,
Yeah,
I forget, millions and millions of dollars before it shot to the peak and then came back down. I mean, he didn't sell at the peak and take all of his winnings home, but he captured he harvested his gains as it went up, and that's true with a lot of these guys. I mean, Roaring Kitty is viewed as sort of the ordinary guy who won, but this community that was around him, the GME owls, I call him, this crowd of retail traders who have been following GameStop for a year. I mean, this spun off a lot of millionaires. And I
mm,
don't think that has fully been appreciated. And some, as you mentioned, who made, over 200 million, 300 million. There were a few people in this community who, individuals who basically made as much as big hedge funds, as the biggest hedge funds
mm.
that cashed in on this. So I think this has, and you've seen the same thing, by the way, in other related realms with crypto. I mean, there's this strange new world of young millionaires walking around, most of whom didn't always cash out at exactly the peak, but it's created this, new world of money that did not exist before.
Yeah, well, it seems like the GME Owls were maybe, I guess, early to the game and understood what was going on. And to me, I thought it was amazing that they didn't sort of step out when, at or near the peak. Because if, usually if you're valuation driven, you'll kind of go, well, now we've achieved my target, I'm out. Many of them did awfully well within the squeeze. I'm trying to think. Michael Burry was an example of sort of probably a sensible person who bought and then when it looked like a bubble, walked away. And so he wouldn't have made nearly as much money as many of these guys. But yeah, the question, I guess, still remains like, the problem, I guess, with a win that comes from a gamble is, do you learn your lesson and stop gambling, or
Yeah.
do you just keep going and grind yourself to zero?
Yeah. And I think that is where, when I talk to a lot of these owls who made millions, and a lot of them, they had been drawn to GameStop because of a very fundamental sort of value driven thesis. And, when it turned into a viral phenomenon, a lot of them felt totally out of their depths. I think everybody in the markets felt out of their depths. Nobody could figure out how to play this or what to do about it. But a lot of them did realize like this is a moment to cash out, and a lot of them did cash out, significantly. I think Roaring Kitty actually is probably one of the people who held on the longest, even though he did, harvest his gains on the way up. A lot of people did cash out, and as I've tracked a lot of those guys, they have applied. A lot of them quit their jobs. They made enough to be able to quit their jobs, and a lot of them are have moved on from GameStop and are doing much more sort of sensible trading. Selling selling covered calls, realizing these little sort of opportunities in the market that are not meme stocks. They didn't join GameStop because it was a meme stock. They joined it because it was something else at the beginning, and they have adapted over time. And a lot of them are essentially professional, prop traders now with their own book, and they're smart. I mean, that is again the story. So often the story in my book is that there's a lot more learning and growing and sort of people people becoming smarter in the course of this.
Early on as well, there was very much this feeling of people helping people. I guess that's probably easier when the community is small. There's points in there where you talk of, I don't know, like millions of people joining on a daily basis near the peak. And I guess even the moderators sort of spotting sharks in the water and trying to throw them out. But to what extent, like, there's something so fascinating about these communities that, well, even the story of, Jamie, the founder of the community, and he kind of walked away and then he noticed it was quite big. And, I think there's a lawsuit right now where he's trying to regain sort of control. But the question even is like, what even other than the name of the community, like what remains of you there, and how to what extent, like, are the big moderators, like many of the people from the book, are they still there? Are they posting on a daily basis, or what's
Yeah, I mean,
happened?
I think to some degree, what you're pointing to is the fact that Wall Street Bets almost became too big for its own good. It grew from a community of, initially a few dozen people to a community of 15 million people, and and at some point these collectives become too large to govern. But I think part of what's happened is that this whole thing has become bigger than Wall Street Bets. I mean, I think Wall Street Bets was at the center of it, but what you have now is a bunch of spin-off both subreddits and Discord communities. This has become a kind of new form of community, and people are finding their way. I mean, I talk in the end about the growth of Discord communities dedicated to investing, and I think that a lot of the sort of action has gone back to those smaller, more intimate communities where people can actually know each other and talk to each other. And Discord is a place where you can be there all day with your community, and it's not just about writing a post and seeing people respond to it. It's a real sense of community, and so I think in some ways things have evolved in that direction, and it's still very much something that young people talk about and form community around. But I think that Wall Street Bets is no longer the center of the action in the way that it was, even though the main moderators who I talk about in my book, I mean, I still talk to them frequently, and they're still in there. They're still trying to figure out how this community grows. I mean, they have big ambitions, but the community sort of has a mind unto itself.
Now, I'm lucky because I got an early copy of the book. When does the book hit the bookshelves?
The book will be released on June 11th, and I'll be doing other appearances around then. This is one of the first conversations. Great conversation. But the book will be hitting on June 11th, and of course, you can order it in advance and you'll get it that day.
Yeah, I mean, I would strongly recommend it. It's not as I said early on, it's not just a book about finance or a book about the GME short squeeze or anything like that. It's very much a book of this time, and I felt it sort of pulled together many threads that you kind of go, yeah, like the world really changed around that time, and it changed because of lockdowns and COVID and cultural changes and working from home and
And social
changing
media.
expectations and even the kind of the friendships, the online education aspect. And I felt even like, there were just some very interesting points in there about even I guess sort of as society became maybe more polite, online discourse became ruder almost as in a trolling way, as you say, but in a way like a reaction possibly against sort of what what people's parents were telling them to do. The kind of
Right.
woke mentality didn't really infiltrate Wall Street Bets to a huge
And now
extent.
I think that online trolling culture has become so powerful that it's spun out and is now sort of overwhelming the old sort of polite popular culture. The mainstream media is sort of losing its hold to this world of online trolling, which is where young people are living, and increasingly sort of, everybody else is getting pulled in as well. It's just this sort of this maelstrom.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on the channel. It's been a delight to have you on. I really enjoyed the book and I do strongly recommend it.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this. Was a great conversation. Thank you for reading it so carefully and being such a great questioner and for, really dig. I mean, as I mentioned to you, I learned so much early on from digging into your videos when this was happening. So it's really
That is so nice of you to say that. So, yeah.
okay. Enjoy.
Okay, talk to you later.
Thank you, Patrick.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you guys for tuning into today's video. I'll put a link to the book in the description if you wish to pre-order a copy. Don't forget to check out our sponsor Novium by clicking on the link in the video description. If you enjoyed this video, you should watch my video with Zeke Fox next on his book Number Go Up, which went on to be named the best book of the year by the FT. Talk to you again soon. Bye.